my opening thought really is about this idea I'm calling dark dopamine. Okay, now some of the Poindexters out there, they've given me shit in my videos in the past, particularly like my dopamine detox video, where they're like, excuse me, you can't quit dopamine, like you can't just like, this isn't how it works. And it's like, I know that, like the idea of detoxing from dopamine is like an oversimplification of how our brains work and everything like that. Like dopamine, you can't live without dopamine. Dopamine is an essential neurotransmitter that governs a lot of different stuff. James probably knows more about that than I do, but I know at the very least, like you need it 100% and it's not a bad thing. Right, James? What does it actually do other than motivation?
Oh, it does loads and loads and loads of things. The main one, which I find really funny, is it's involved in motor function. So if you do a proper dopamine detox, you will literally be unable to move, drooling on the floor. It's like, well, lads, that's probably not what we want, really. But, you know, I know like your audience will understand this, but it's like I see some of the emails that come in, which is quite a lot. And some of them are fairly alarming in the understanding of theory. Obviously, I can understand why people might get that from the sensationalism of such stuff. You know, it's just good to sort of get the science in once in a while, I think.
Yeah. The big thing that we're trying to cut out here, this idea that I have around dark dopamine, if you're on the daily email, you saw my email about that. It's just the idea that you're getting dopamine, you're getting that like mental juice, you're getting that anticipation from something that doesn't really serve you. Basically, your brain has attached a reward cue to something that's not actually rewarding, right? And so there's a million different ways in which we fall into this trap today. So like, you know, that greasy McDonald's food, your brain sends this signal like, oh, that's super valuable to your survival, because that's the way, you know, our bodies are wired to think super high calorie, high salt, you know, crap like that is like really good for you. When in reality, you know, it's actually not. It's not very nutritionally sound for us. So our brain attaches a faulty reward sensation to it. All right. And this shows up in a bunch of different places. Obviously, porn is one of the big ones we talk about here. That's probably, is that like officially the most potent, like non-exogenously induced like dopamine spike you can get? Like that's artificial?
I would presume so, yeah, because like you can use pornography to completely remove like panic attacks and anxiety. Not clinically tested, but for example, if you're going to look at something that's going to take you out of a anxiety state, pornography is probably the thing that would suck you in the most.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, what else could it possibly be besides that?
Yeah, I mean, like I think it would have to be that, right? Other than like maybe some kind of other like then it would be like real case by case sort of thing where someone's like created some super weird like behavioral addiction or I mean, other than that, it's pretty much just like like crystal meth and cocaine and that kind of stuff. Like that's gonna get on that level. So like, yeah, that one's a big spike. Obviously, it doesn't serve you super well, causes all these kinds of problems and whatnot. But we'll get into that a little bit more with No Nut November. If you're being really honest with yourself, this kind of stuff shows up everywhere in your life. And this is something that me, even being on this path for years, like I'm still doing like deep cleaning, right? I'm still figuring out exactly what activities really serve me and what activities really just stimulate me, but don't actually serve me in the long run. So it's like, you know, everything from junk food to social media to internet surfing to sometimes even just like compulsively chatting with friends and stuff like that. Even good things can turn to being some sort of dark stimulation, you know, unhelpful stimulation after a while, right? And this is all, you know, pretty straightforward stuff. Everyone understands this. But the big thing I see is that we get into this mindset where the goal feels like balance. We need to kind of have kind of our bad, naughty stuff and mostly good stuff. And as long as we keep it in balance, we're fine. Like, you know, eat healthy most of the time. And then, you know, you have your cheat day on the weekend where you pound junk food and that sort of thing. And on one hand, this can work. You can find a level of stability in it. But for me personally, I've always found it to be a very vulnerable sort of cycle where, especially when you swing into that indulgent side, it's super difficult to moderate. It's not impossible. You can do it. But it opens up the door for things to go south. Like, so for example, if I, if I go back into solo competitive video games and I'm just like, oh, I'll just try it out. I'll just play it on weekends, or I'll just play it with friends or whatever. Before long, I'm like, wasting hours of my time doing it, because that's the way our brain is designed to respond to this kind of stuff. There's this binge behavior that seems to override our rational faculty. So like, obviously porn was one of those big things for me in the past, like that. Video games have been something like that. Hell, even like fantasy novels. Like if I start reading a fantasy novel or watching some show, like I'll feel like I can't stop until I'm done with it. And moderating it feels extremely difficult. Am I alone in this, James, or would you agree with me?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. One of the things I've done in my life is basically to cut all of that stuff out sort of naturally over time. Of course, we can go on and talk about this, but it's like there's not really an option to do that in sort of like day to day. Talking about like in the last episode about social media, it's like I don't have those accounts.
Right.
They're like business-based accounts. I just was like, no more. But yeah, they're incredibly seductive because it's an evolutionary mismatch. Those things that are going to be good for our adaptation and survival to whatever niche that we happen to be in, we've inherited those ththings. And so, I mean, but the difference is we've evolved a higher level of consciousness, quote unquote. I know that's a woo-woo phrase, than say the other animals, in that we're more reflexive than the other animals. The evidence seems to be. So really the test is, can you use that to redirect where your instincts are going to in those immediate moments, away from, say, sugary food and towards something which consciously to be nutritional. Of course, that does generate some amount of pain, but sometimes that's necessary.
Right. And the real issue is that our technology for feeding these kind of, vices has really outstripped our internal technology of self-control. And, particularly because you can make a lot of money. If you can press people's pleasure buttons, you can make money, plain and simple, right? The thing that I've found, and the thing that I had to kind of like really learn on a deep level, like how to do, was this idea that, all right, the solution is not going to be found in maintaining this proper balance of the pendulum where we swing one way sometimes and one way the other time. It's kind of more along the line of what you said, where it's actually about reconditioning our tastes so that like ultimately like the goal would be to have, instead of separating our work from our play, we want our work to feel like play, and we want our play to be productive. We want it to energize us, to make our life better rather than be something that we have to recover from. Like, so for example, if I was going to contrast who I was in college, like who I was in college is I was doing work that I absolutely hated because I didn't know myself. And I didn't have a knowledge of how I could live better. So I was doing this computer science stuff that I sucked at, that I hated. And it was just like all just painful work. And then on the weekends, my play was just like, the basic college debauchery of drinking, partying, sex, drugs, all that kind of stuff. And like that broke me down. Both things broke me down, just in different ways. So it was kind of like this lifestyle where you'd pendulum swing in one way, you'd hurt yourself. And then while you were sort of recovering, you'd just hurt yourself in another way. And like, that's how I think most people are, even if it's not as extreme, right? They'll work a job that they hate. They'll come home. They'll like, pound a 6-pack, and like that's their swing. And they think, oh, well, maybe, I could try and get a little bit better of a job, or maybe I could drink not so many beers and that sort of thing. But again, I think that's the wrong strategy. You have to be trying to think of how can you synthesize these things? And it's not an easy process, but it's one that like ultimately what it requires is you to understand that your tastes can change if you give yourself the appropriate conditioning time and internal support and external support. So for example, like the idea for like me back in the day trying to quit porn, that was something that literally felt impossible, because like when I would try to quit, it felt like I was dying. But you go through the reconditioning process, all of a sudden, like if I see porn now, it actually like it makes me kind of sick. Like it's like I don't want to see it. Like, yeah, there's a part that's still aroused by, beautiful women, but like there's a another part that sees it for what it is, and I've reconditioned it so it's like there's no longer the overwhelming attraction and everything to it. And this can go through everything. Like you can recondition your taste buds. People, you hear about this sometimes where people like, they eat really unhealthy and then all of a sudden they have a health scare. The doctor says they need to clean up their life, and they do. They eat super clean, and all of a sudden the old junk food they used to love is now disgusting to them. Right? And it's this kind of transformation that really we should be aiming for. And so like, this is the way you got to start thinking about it. Like in reference to that, the guy who goes home and drinks a 6-pack, you got to ask, well, what's he getting out of that? What's another way he could get that thing that would serve him better? Maybe he's actually probably a prime candidate for an exercise routine, or maybe like some kind of even like breathing routine or meditation or prayer, or maybe he's just lonely. Maybe he needs to be the guy who like joins a social club or like volunteers or just finds a way that he goes and he connects with people. Like we all have different things that we need, and often we just fill those needs unconsciously, and then we feel like we need to somehow like fight against them. But that's not really the right case. It's just replace them with something better.